Welcome to Women's Football Hub. I am your host for this episode. I am Carolyn Kent, and my guest today is a lecturer at BNU, Buckinghamshire New University. He's a registered sports nutritionist. He's currently studying for a PhD looking into nutritional interventions for injury prevention and rehabilitation in female football players. Welcome to Women's Football Hub, Phil Woodbridge.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's very lovely to have you here, and I'm really interested in the PhD work that you're actually doing, because you're actually working with recreational football players, aren't you?
Yeah, so I'm looking at recreational players, so levels 4 or 5 within the women's football structure in England, because it's a growing population, because women's football has got much more popular, but it's an under-researched population. There's very little research in women's football in general, but in recreational players, it's even less. So, there was a gap in our knowledge, which is what we're looking for at PhD level, and that was one I decided to start to have a look at.
And what was it that kind of motivated you to do this? What was there anything that you kind of had experience of, and you thought, do you know what, that's what I want to do with my PhD?
Well, two things really. One, I had worked with two of the local clubs who were at that level. So we're based in High Wycombe in Buckinghamshire. So there was a couple of the local teams at that level that had been into us and had testing, and we developed a bit of a relationship. So that was a starting point. We had a relationship, and also we've got quite a strong sports therapy section within the university. And so my supervisor is a sports therapist, so that was where the injury angle came from. So, like, I'm a nutritionist, you're a sports therapist, can we sort of combine our expertise within this area and see if there's some research that we can undertake?
So what's your question then? What is the question that you are trying to answer with your PhD?
The big question, which sort of pulls all the different studies together, is whether nutritional intakes or nutrition for female football players can reduce injury rates and improve recovery rates. So is there something there that we can improve by improving our support for female players at that level?
All right. So how have you broken down that question then? Because usually that would be by doing several studies. Tell me about study number one that you started off with.
So study number one was sort of a baseline, have we got a problem? What do recreational football players eat? Do they eat what is recommended for female football players? So we've got recommendations from UEFA about, how much energy and carbohydrate and protein they should be eating. So do they eat that amount? So I did sort of 3 parts to the study. One was a food diary. So they filled out a food diary for me so I could analyse their nutritional intakes. They then did a questionnaire looking at their knowledge of sports nutrition, so I could see whether there was any link between knowledge and intakes. And then the final one was looking at the potential symptoms of low energy. So the science suggests that if a player has long-term low energy, then potentially they may have disturbed menstrual cycles, problems with GI, gastrointestinal problems, and potentially higher rates of injury in theory. But it is very sort of theoretical, the model. So it was then to say, well, let's dig a bit deeper and see if the players that haven't been eating enough, do they experience some of those symptoms? Is there any correlations between those things?
And what did you find?
Various things. That low energy as defined by what they eat was relatively high. 56% had low energy. The questionnaire part of it, which was sort of the symptoms of low energy, 43%, so not quite as high. And that nutrition knowledge was relatively low, which I think is not surprising given that the players at this level don't get nutritional support. So 30% had poor nutrition knowledge. So it was low nutrition knowledge, low energy, and with low energy, given the levels, it was sort of at 400 or 500 calories lower than the target. It means that everything else is low. Because obviously energy then filters down into carbohydrate and protein and all the micronutrients. It's because you're not getting enough total food, you're not getting enough of anything. So it sort of reinforced that theory, that the sort of hypothesis, using the scientific sort of phraseology, was that this is what we would find, because it is found in elite players. The studies that are out there in elite players suggest they don't get enough energy and they don't get enough carbohydrates. So they were the big findings. And that what was interesting was that I then split it into at-risk players and not at-risk players. So we had a sort of threshold for energy intake and a threshold for the symptoms, and that the players that were at risk had much lower nutrition knowledge than the players that weren't at risk.
Right.
So it sort of suggested that if I could improve their knowledge, I might address some of those problems. Not all studies show that. Some show that there isn't a correlation necessarily between knowledge and intakes, because it isn't just about knowledge, is it? Because you might know what you need to eat. If you're training and playing and you're busy and you don't get home till 10 o'clock at night and there's nothing in the fridge, that's not because you don't know what to eat. That's just the sort of practical sort of day-to-day life problems of fitting exercise in and playing football in around the rest of your life, because most of these players are working. They're working as well, so they've got full-time jobs and they're trying to play football to a reasonable standard. A couple of games a week, training a couple of times a week. So it tends to be after work and at weekends.
Well, that's that, and obviously nutrition is one of the cornerstones of recovery as well. So if they are doing that, obviously if they're not recovering well and they've got low energy already, that can possibly have knock-on effects. So what did you do with that information then? What did you do with the information that you gathered from study number 1?
Well, firstly, wrote it up and produced a paper. The paper's in for review at the moment, so hopefully that will get published over the next couple of months. But then, so then study 2 said, well, we've identified low energy, we've identified low carbohydrate. Can we then? So season 1 was study 1. Season 2, beginning of season 2, with the same 3 or 4 squads of players, we then started a nutrition intervention to say, can we increase nutrition knowledge in this sort of study population, with a nutritionist that isn't there every day telling them what to eat, providing the food like they would at maybe a WSL level, where they'd have somebody in the changing room providing them with drinks and gels and everything. That these are players that have got to sort of look after themselves, but can we provide support at a distance that would help them to sort of achieve some of these targets that they're missing. And the sort of science suggested that you want to do a number of things. One is have 2 clear objectives. So you're not trying to do too many things all at once. So the 2 objectives were increase the energy, because like I said before, that then has a knock-on effect to everything else, but also increase carbohydrate, because that's sort of the key fuel for exercise, for fueling football, because it's used at higher intensities. So those are the 2 objectives. And then I developed a sort of 6-month, season-long intervention, and that was the other thing that science suggested. You can't just go with a 2-week program. It's not going to have effect quick enough. So 6-month program, they had weekly emails with weekly emails, monthly videos, and it was recipes, it was meal plans, it was hints and tips, as well as the sort of subject related material, and then interspersed with some motivational type stuff. So I use this thing called the COM-B model, which is it's a way of designing an intervention, but using a structured scientific approach. So it's capability, opportunity, and motivation. So you're trying to say, okay, capability, that might come from knowledge and recipes. And then the opportunity, you might then start providing them with food and at half time or before games, so they've got the opportunity to eat the right things. And then the motivational side of it is, one, by getting regular communication, but secondly, I used some sort of quotes from high profile players and nutritionists and coaches to say, yeah, food's important, nutrition is important. So that was the sort of putting all those things together to try and hit those two targets of increase in energy, increase in carbohydrate.
Lovely. And did you find that the combi model actually worked?
It's really difficult to say because it is quite complex. Much as it gives you a structured way of designing an intervention, there's lots and lots of tools within it, lots of strategies and tactics. It's quite complicated, and you're trying to simplify it down because you don't want it to be too complicated, but you want to tick those boxes. So the answer to your question is it had an effect,
Hmm.
and I think the structure meant that you ticked quite a few boxes. So yeah, in from a sort of basic analysis, a simplified analysis, yes, it seems to have worked.
I'm getting the impression that with regards to setting up nutrition research, there might be some issues that you maybe have to think about. Do you feel that there are issues with setting up nutrition research, or is nutrition research pretty standardized right across the entire field?
No, there's lots of challenges and lots of difficulties um, and lots of question marks about it. The reliability of it, because straight away you're asking people to fill in a food diary.
Hmm.
Are they going to tell you? Well, three questions really. Are they going to tell you what they eat? Are they going to miss things out?
Hmm.
And are they going to change what they eat compared with normal? So are they going to not eat that Mars bar that they would normally eat because they know they're writing it down and giving it to the nutritionist? So you've got to sort of factor that in. So there is a thing called underreporting, which is we all have to acknowledge within, when we're analysing um, footballers and any sports food diaries, that there is an element of underreporting. So you have to factor that in, and that's been shown in a couple of studies when they've actually used a biochemical marker to then say, well, okay, this is what they said they ate, this is what the physiologically we measured that they ate, and they reckon that's about 18 to 20% potentially underreporting. So you have to factor that in to say, okay, it looks like they're not eating enough, but is that just because they've underreported, not because they haven't eaten enough? So there's all those sort of things you have to step back from as a nutritionist and say, right, okay, I'm now making a judgment on this. And you do it when you do it, we work in one-to-one with players. You're still saying this isn't an exact science. If you told me and say you eat 2,000 calories, that might be one day. You might eat 2,500 the next day. You might be 1,800 the day after. So we tend to use 3-day food diaries because you want it long enough to be able to give you a sort of reasonable feel for their diet, but not too long that people get bored with it and fed up with it, and the quality of the data reduces. So it was 3-day food diaries, and yeah, factoring in that underreporting, you can sort of measure it a bit, but you have to sort of when I'm discussing how much they were under eating, that potentially there's an element of that in there.
I'm interested in the food diary. How was that delivered? Was that an actual like diary, as in paper diary? Was it an electronic form? How did you do that with those players?
We used a system called Nutritics, which is an analysis software package, and that has an app within it. So basically, the players were invited to download the app. They could then download the app. I don't know if anybody's familiar with MyFitnessPal. It's a very similar way. It's got a barcode scanner, and you basically do it on your phone and on your tablet, because I wanted it to be easy as possible for them to do. It has sort of photos for portion sizes, which is another element that can be problematic. You can't get people weighing everything they eat, so you're asking them to tell you whether there's a small bowl of porridge or a large bowl of porridge, but there's photos on the app, so that at least they can be having a look and saying, oh yeah, that's the sort of portion size. So it was a, a digital way of
Hmm.
recording the diary rather than physically writing down everything they ate. And then that for me, it simplifies the process as well, because I can just download that, and then it produces me all the reports for the energy, the macronutrients, the micronutrients, and then I can pull that as one data file.
So what was your take homes then from study number 2?
Study number 2 was that it was a difficult one because engagement wasn't 100%, and that was for a number of reasons. I think it was over a season, so the players changed. Some players changed clubs, some players stopped playing, some players got injured. So it wasn't. It was difficult to maintain all the players throughout all the season. So I had lower numbers at the end of it. So that was a challenge, and on the YouTube channel, I could see that after the first video, the viewing figures started to drop. They were 20-minute videos. The first video, maybe, I think I got 90 odd views at 15 minutes, but by the end of it, they were sort of 25 views of 2 minutes. So I did adjust that, and we did produce some bite-sized briefs. So we did some 2-minute videos for carbohydrate and energy to say, well, okay, maybe we haven't got the attention span with these players to sit there and watch a 20-minute video. So we sort of decided to reduce those and do 2-minute slots to try and just get the key messages over. So, and the energy intakes did increase, in the players that went through the whole process and came out the other side and completed the same process again at the end of the season. So the food diary, the 2 questionnaires, their knowledge went up, their energy intakes went up, and their energy availability went up. But I didn't get statistically significant results. But when I measured effect sizes, I did get moderate effect sizes for some of those key metrics. Was knowledge, which actually went up. It was one of those things where the statistics can hide things that are practically significant. In that the first study, I had 30% that were in that poor category for knowledge. Study 2, it was only 10%. So it had shifted a lot of those players up in their nutrition knowledge. But as far as the score, I think the average went from 56 to 61. That wasn't statistically significant, but I think that is significant, isn't it? If you've got 10% of the players now that have got poor knowledge compared with 30% before the study, then that's helped. The energy availability went up, and that had a moderate effect size, so that was good. And the carbohydrate was up, but the carbohydrate wasn't even though it had gone up and it was up with a moderate effect size, so we had improved it, it still was below the recommended levels. Increased it enough to say that, yeah, it was hitting what the UEFA say a footballer should be eating.
And I think you've highlighted some nice points there, like, first of all, just because you put up some videos, they might not watch them. You don't necessarily get behavior change just because you put something in front of someone, but you did also have an effect on their energy availability. Then you also have an effect on the fact that their knowledge went up. What you're also doing is you're doing research within the field, right? Which is very different to doing it within a controlled environment like a laboratory.
And it's this thing with sort of practical significance. So, you're saying statistical significance versus practical significance, whereas in the sports field, and I think it's common in strength and conditioning type research, where they say a very small effect can have a big impact. So it might look like you haven't moved the dial that far, but I think the increase in energy availability was 16%. Well, that might not be statistically significant, but that might have quite a big impact practically on improvements in energy availability, and therefore impact of training and impact during a game. So I think one thing, when I've reflected on the intervention, and I thought was quite interesting, was that I had 3 clubs, and I presented to all the players at the beginning, but one club, the coach really got behind it, and that made such an impact. That the club where she was encouraging the players and WhatsApping the players and sending the emails went to the players individually, but she was also supporting it. Whereas a couple of the other clubs was literally, it was left to me, okay, Phil, you're fine, you can have access to the players, but we're not going to do anything else. Does that make sense? That it was so I felt afterwards that maybe I should have done a better selling job on the coaching and support staff, or got somebody within the club that was my sort of cheerleader, that was seen, because I'm remote and not at every training session. And it was a classic example where it was one where I turned up and it was, oh, sorry, Phil, you can't see the players because I don't want to detract their attention from the game. And I was going to do a short talk on half time, what they could eat at half time to help them in the game an hour before the game. And yet it was felt it was going to detract from the attention. So that's the thing you potentially sort of coming up against.
Well, that's it. And these are real world examples of what actually happens in football, and these are the types of potential barriers or the potential enablers that you're going to come up against. And it's about being aware of those things. So of course you took study 2 and you've now moved on to study number 3. Tell me about study number 3 of your PhD.
Well, study number 3 sort of changed a bit as I've gone through the process, because the teams I'm working with don't tend to have full-time physiotherapy support and full-time sports therapists. I wanted to look at injury rates and the impact that nutrition could have on it, and that's still ongoing because study 2 didn't show any direct impact on the injury score. That was pretty much the same season to season. But my feeling is, well, that's probably too early to judge the nutrition impact. So I'm going to go back at the end of next season and measure the players again, ask them to fill that in again and see whether over 2 seasons it's had any impact. So that was the first thing. So the study 3 was then, we decided to then look at case studies to say, well, when a player gets injured, can we do a nutritional intervention then that helps them recover and the rehabilitation recovery. There's some theoretical stuff within the literature to say, here's some things you can do, and this is what you should do as part of a rehab and recovery. But go through that process with individual players with individual injuries in sort of the real world sort of situation. So I've got 3 ongoing case studies at the moment with players with different types of injuries and different issues, where I'm supporting them one-on-one, but we're measuring things like fat-free mass, lean mass, body fat percentage, weight. They're doing food diaries for me, where we're seeing, well, okay, if they stick to what I ask them to do, does it impact the numbers in their sort of personal, the impact that the rehab is having physiologically.
So tell me about those cases then. What are you dealing with at the moment?
Well, this is one of the girls is recovering from an ACL, and that club, the ACLs and knee injuries in the first study were the highest. And if you read the literature, women seem to be getting more ACL injuries than males players. They seem to get fewer injuries, I think, the most of the literature suggests, but the injuries they get are more serious, and that's partly because of this ACL. And in that club, they got an ACL club. They got a WhatsApp group of players that were at various stages of recovery from ACL. So that does highlight the issue. So the first player had the ACL operation in February, and so I've been working with her. She was in my original study, so I had sort of baseline figures. So I could say this is what she was like when she was playing, as far as, like I say, body fat, fat-free mass, and what her energy intakes were, and then so I've been going through the process with her where we've been setting targets for energy, so that she's not having too much energy but not having too little. She's having the right proportion of protein, which is important for that whole, well, 2 things. One, the mitigating the muscle atrophy when she was not being able to play, but also increase the muscle hypertrophy and muscle rebuilding once she is starting to train and go through the process. So she's just starting to run again. So we're quite a good way into it, and it does seem to have worked. She didn't lose a lot of body mass, and we've retained a lot of her fat-free mass, because we were up at the it was sort of 2.5 grams per kilogram. It doesn't mean a lot to people, but that's the recommendations for protein. So you're right up at the maximum amount. We managed to keep her at that level through diet plans and meal plans and working with her, and that does seem to have helped with increasing the the skeletal muscle and the fat-free mass once she's going through the sort of rehab process. So that's case study 1. Case study 2 was a player who'd got a bulging discs, a back problem, and potentially a stress fracture as well. So different type of injury. So working with her and again doing the same sort of thing, but it is a personalised approach. So she'd got different issues with her diet than the first player, but we did sort of say similar process of measuring one-on-one interventions to try and help them through that recovery process and get through it better and quicker. And the last one is a young player who struggled with that sort of move up to sort of adult playing. She's sort of very small, very frail, doesn't eat a lot, and so trying to help her with that whole thing of going from a sort of girls football to women's football, and that transition for somebody who's quite small and quite frail and probably, yeah, like a lot of players, just doesn't eat enough really to support the training and sort of conditioning work that the coaches and S&C guys are supporting with. So that's going to be quite interesting in sort of building on the work and saying, can we there are some interesting case studies on male players in that space, but they've tended to be Premiership professional footballers with full-time support, and they're on a DEXA scanner every day checking their body comp, so it's a completely different sort of intervention. But saying, well, I think I said to you before, I'm trying to get small pieces in this massive puzzle, which is women's nutrition in sport. It's a huge area, and the whole injury thing. And there's a thought at the moment is this idea of low energy leading to RED-S and relative energy deficiency in sport. Well, is that just a convenient link? Because there's so many factors that get involved, that can we really say that's just down to low energy? Well, hopefully some of my research will start to fill in those gaps to say, well, does that relate to injury? And if we get it right, does that help reduce injury rates and help with recovery? Or is it not energy? Is it carbohydrate? Is that the issue? Because they're so closely linked, it's difficult to strip out.
I think from my perspective, that's one of the things that we look at with regards to players. Recovery wise, nutrition is important. From a growth perspective, if you want to kind of have kind of gains in the gym, nutrition is important. And if we're finding that actually in women's football, nutrition's not managed as well as it could or should be, we're going to have some issues with the players. When do your case studies end? When will you kind of have some data? When does the study end?
And with Esom, it'll probably be return to play. I think the ACL, she's starting running now. We think she might play this season, so probably take her through to the end of the season. So take her return to play plus a bit, take it through the whole process. The back player with a back problem, she's close to return to play, probably another couple of months. So just take them through the whole from injury through to return to play. And the third one, just support her and see if we can get her back and playing at a level within women's football that she feels she can be competitive at. So yeah, just taking that through to probably the end of next season, which would be good because I've got to submit my thesis in 2026.
So we're looking for the kind of study overall to be the kind of PhD study overall to be done by 2026. Is that right?
Yeah. So that would be it's a 5-year part-time project which would cover 3 and a bit seasons, the teams.
Well, I'll definitely look forward to kind of seeing what comes out of your research, Phil. I think it's a fascinating study, and I'm still reeling from the fact that I know this is happening, but there are clubs out there with ACL WhatsApp groups. If you're having ACL WhatsApp groups, it's probably time to have a little look at your injury prevention. And I think, yeah, it hurts me to my soul that there are WhatsApp groups out there just with ACL injured players in one club. So I am very much looking forward to finding out the rest of your PhD. I'll hopefully get a chance to read it because I'm that type of person. I read PhDs when they come out. So I can't thank you enough for coming on to the podcast. I'm really kind of humbled by the amount of people that have offered to come on and chat to us. And it's such an important area that you're working in. I really wish you all the best of luck with the rest of your PhD. And if you are out there and you are working with athletes, please do have a think about their nutrition and definitely please follow the evidence, and we will see you soon.
Thank you for listening to Women's Football Hub. The information within this podcast is for informational purposes only. No material on this podcast is intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please contact your doctor or another healthcare professional if you have any questions about anything raised in this podcast.